Imagine a world where Linux isn't just the niche playground of developers and IT enthusiasts, but a mainstream choice on millions of desktops worldwide. A world where switching to Linux is as natural and easy as installing Windows or Mac OS, and where compatibility, software availability, and user experience no longer feel like barriers, but rather seamless parts of daily computing. This isn't some far-off dream. With the pace of technology and community-driven innovation, the question we're tackling today is, will Linux desktops finally go mainstream by 2026? It's a bold claim, and to understand it fully, we need to explore the history of Linux on desktops, its current state, and the trends shaping its future. Let's start with a bit of history. Linux and its many distributions has been around since the early 1990s. It began as a hobbyist project by Linus Torvalds, designed to be a free and open-source alternative to the then-dominant operating systems. For years, Linux found its home mostly in servers, supercomputers, and eventually embedded systems. The desktop, however, remained elusive. Early Linux desktop environments like GNOME and KDE offered basic functionality, but they struggled with user-friendliness and compatibility. Installing Linux back then could feel like a mission, requiring knowledge of command lines, partitioning, and drivers. It was powerful, yes, but it wasn't for the casual user. Fast forward to today, and things look very different. Modern Linux distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, Linux, Mint, and Pop!_OS have made the desktop experience far more accessible. Installation processes are simplified with graphical installers. Hardware support is better than ever, and the ecosystem of software, both open source and proprietary, has grown exponentially. Even big companies like Microsoft and Google are now supporting Linux in various capacities, from Windows subsystem for Linux to Android's Linux kernel backbone, signaling a growing industry recognition of Linux's importance. But the key question remains, is Linux ready to go mainstream for everyday desktop users? And what would that actually look like in 2026? To answer that, we need to examine several key factors: ease of use, software availability, gaming, enterprise adoption, hardware compatibility, and market perception. Starting with ease of use, Linux desktops have made huge strides. User interfaces have become more intuitive, and distributions now offer experiences that are arguably on par with Windows or Mac OS in terms of aesthetics and navigation. Ubuntu's GNOME desktop, for instance, has a clean design that requires minimal learning for someone switching from Windows. Linux Mint's Cinnamon interface mirrors the familiarity of the Windows desktop layout, making transitions easier for new users. Pop!_OS, developed by System76, is designed specifically with a focus on productivity and modern hardware, adding features like automatic window tiling that even seasoned Windows users find impressive. The bottom line is that Linux is no longer scary for beginners. It's approachable. And by 2026, we can expect further refinements in interface design and user onboarding, reducing the learning curve even further. Now, let's talk about software availability, which has historically been Linux's Achilles heel. While Linux offers a wealth of open-source alternatives, LibreOffice, GIMP, Inkscape, Blender, the lack of mainstream commercial software has been a sticking point. Many users rely on applications like Adobe, Photoshop, Microsoft Office, or industry-specific software that either doesn't run natively on Linux or has only limited support via tools like Wine or virtual machines. However, this landscape is changing rapidly. Adobe has been experimenting with Linux compatibility for some of its products, and Microsoft Office's web apps are fully accessible on Linux browsers. Additionally, software distribution platforms like Steam, FlatHub, and Snap are simplifying the installation of a wide range of applications, creating a unified ecosystem similar to what Windows users experience with the Microsoft Store or Mac users with the App Store. By 2026, the proliferation of containerized and cross-platform apps may make Linux nearly indistinguishable from Windows or Mac OS in terms of software options, breaking one of the last major barriers to mainstream adoption. Gaming is another area where Linux has historically struggled, but the story is improving dramatically. Thanks to projects like Proton, developed by Valve, running Windows games on Linux has become increasingly seamless. Steam Play allows thousands of Windows-exclusive games to run natively on Linux with minimal user intervention. Big names in gaming, including Epic Games and Ubisoft, are also exploring Linux compatibility, while indie developers often release Linux versions from the outset. Gaming hardware manufacturers are taking notice too. NVIDIA and AMD offer drivers that rival or even surpass Windows performance in some scenarios. By 2026, the combination of improved drivers, wider native support, and tools like Proton could make Linux a legitimate gaming platform for casual and hardcore gamers alike, further increasing its mainstream appeal. Enterprise adoption is another critical factor for Linux's rise. Businesses have been slow to embrace Linux on desktops due to concerns about training, software compatibility, and support. However, the enterprise landscape is shifting. Companies like System76, Purism, and even Dell are offering Linux-based laptops and desktops with professional support contracts. Additionally, the rise of cloud-based productivity tools reduces dependency on Windows-only software. Think of Google Workspace, Slack, Zoom, and Microsoft Teams, all of which run perfectly on Linux. By 2026, enterprises may start offering Linux as a standard option, especially for developers, designers, and remote workers, legitimizing Linux as a mainstream choice in professional environments. Hardware compatibility, a historically painful point for Linux users, has seen major improvements. Modern Linux kernels include drivers for most CPUs, GPUs, Wi-Fi adapters, and peripherals. Laptop vendors like System76, Tuxedo, and Dell are shipping machines with Linux pre-installed, and big names like Lenovo have certified Linux on select models. This trend is crucial because mainstream users expect plug-and-play compatibility. No one wants to wrestle with drivers or worry about a Wi-Fi card not working. By 2026, we can reasonably expect even broader hardware support, reducing one of the final technical hurdles to adoption. Market perception, however, may be the hardest barrier to overcome. Many people equate Linux with complexity or associate it only with programming and tech enthusiasts. Changing that perception requires visibility and success stories. Chromebooks have already introduced millions of users to Linux in the background via Chrome OS's Linux subsystem. Initiatives like Ubuntu and Pop!_OS being preloaded on consumer laptops also help normalize Linux as a daily use OS. By 2026, as more people encounter Linux in professional, educational, and casual contexts, the perception will shift. The key will be highlighting Linux's stability, security, and performance advantages without overwhelming users with technical jargon. Another interesting trend pushing Linux toward the mainstream is the rise of cloud and containerization. With more applications moving to the web or running in containers, the underlying operating system matters less to end users. If your daily apps run in the cloud, the desktop OS becomes a choice of preference rather than necessity. This gives Linux an edge, especially as organizations look to reduce costs and improve security. Linux is lightweight, secure, and highly customizable, making it an ideal platform in this emerging paradigm. Security is another compelling argument for Linux adoption. Ransomware and malware attacks continue to plague Windows environments, while Linux desktops remain relatively immune. For users concerned about privacy and data integrity, Linux presents a strong alternative. By 2026, as cybersecurity awareness grows among individuals and organizations, this advantage could be a key selling point in making Linux a mainstream desktop option. Community support, often overlooked, is another pillar of Linux's potential growth. Unlike proprietary OS ecosystems, Linux benefits from passionate developers and users worldwide who contribute to software development. Troubleshooting and documentation, forums, social media groups, and dedicated communities provide help 24/7. This community-driven model is incredibly robust, scalable, and adaptive, and as Linux grows, the ecosystem will only become stronger. For mainstream users, this means support is always accessible, whether through official channels or community expertise. However, challenges remain. Fragmentation is one such challenge. With hundreds of distributions and countless desktop environments, newcomers can be overwhelmed by choice. Which Linux is best? Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch, or Pop!_OS? Which desktop environment should I pick? GNOME, KDE, Cinnamon, or something else entirely? Simplifying the decision-making process is crucial for mainstream adoption. Some predict that by 2026, consolidation may occur around a few key distributions targeting mainstream users, much like how iOS and Android dominate mobile platforms. Another potential challenge is legacy software. Many businesses and users rely on older applications that may never be ported to Linux. Solutions like Wine, Crossover, or virtual machines help, but they aren't perfect. Till most users can run the software they need without compromise, Linux may remain a secondary option for some. Yet with cloud-based and SaaS applications becoming more prevalent, this challenge is slowly diminishing, making Linux a viable choice for a broader audience over time. So, by 2026, what does mainstream adoption of Linux look like? Picture this: laptops and desktops sold in electronic stores with Linux pre-installed. Marketed for everyday productivity, gaming, and creative work. Schools and universities offering Linux as a standard option for students. Professionals using Linux in enterprise environments, with IT departments providing official support. Gamers enjoying the latest AAA titles with performance rivaling Windows. Individuals appreciating a secure, customizable, and efficient computing experience without needing extensive technical knowledge. In short, Linux becomes a viable, trusted, and visible choice alongside Windows and Mac OS. The next few years are pivotal. The combination of better usability, wider software availability, improved gaming support, enterprise adoption, hardware compatibility, security advantages, and changing market perceptions all converge to make 2026 a realistic milestone for mainstream Linux adoption. It won't happen overnight, and Linux may never capture the same market share as Windows in sheer numbers. But for those who prioritize stability, security, performance, and control over their computing environment, Linux may well become the first choice rather than a fallback option. In conclusion, the question of whether Linux desktops will go mainstream by 2026 isn't just about technology. It's about perception, accessibility, and the broader shifts in computing itself. The pieces are in place. Linux is easier to use, software is more available, gaming is viable, enterprises are warming up, and hardware compatibility is improving. The only remaining piece is widespread visibility and continued refinement of the user experience. If the trends continue and the momentum is undeniable, then 2026 could indeed mark a turning point for Linux on the desktop. A year where Linux steps out of the shadows of niche enthusiasts and becomes a legitimate, mainstream option for everyone, from students to professionals, gamers to casual users, creators to everyday computer users. Linux might finally achieve what many have dreamed for decades, a desktop revolution powered by freedom, community, and choice. And when that happens, the computing landscape will never be the same again.